So the main thing we're going to be talking about today is how we analyze capital investments. So the questions here are, what if you're making a construction project, right? Like, let's say you are going to be building an apartment structure over the next 5 years, and you expect to rent it out for the next 30 years. How do we make an investment decision regarding that? How do we determine if that's a good project? Or what if we're a construction company with multiple projects? Or what if you're just a person like you are, right? Like, what if you are deciding between getting an accounting degree or going to start work right now? All of these concepts require the idea of a break-even time and a payback period and a rate of return. And so that's really what we're covering today. It's going to be a relatively quick lecture, but it's really important. It's putting together all the other pieces of information we've talked about to date. So capital budgeting. What is capital budgeting? We've talked about budgeting the last few chapters, but this is a process of analyzing alternative long-term investments and deciding which assets to acquire or sell. So personally, you could buy a home, you could rent a home, you could buy stocks, you could buy rental property, you could invest in your education. Now, there's an unlimited amount of things you can do with your time and resources. How do you decide what is more valuable than the other? How do you make a rational decision? That's what we're talking about today. Businesses have even more issues. The more money you have, what is like the classic saying, more money, more problems? Well, it's actually true in a lot of regards, where once you have more money, how you have more things you can do. How do you make a decision that's going to maximize your money and not make it stagnant? And so that's what we're going to be talking about. So capital budgeting process is, if we're a large corporation, a department or plant manager is going to submit proposals on what they think should be a good use of the money. And then a committee will evaluate those proposals. And then depending on the size, an executive or the board of directors might approve it. This could be for anything. So it could be if we're going to invest in a customer, if we're going to sell something to a customer, if we're going to build a project, if we're going, all of that goes into capital budgeting, if we're going to build a new office. So capital budgeting decisions require really careful analysis because often the outcome is uncertain. Imagine if you were a boba shop that opened up in January 2020. No one could have predicted the pandemic was going to occur. So how could this analysis couldn't have predicted that. And most of those shops went out of business, and it's very unfortunate, but that we have to be really careful and identify that there's always this level of risk that we're taking on. We're normally investing large amounts of money when we're making these decisions. So if you were to open up a boba shop, you're looking at least $100,000 to set it up, pay for in the Bay Area to set up your lease, hire initial employees, do your marketing, and buy all the initial equipment. And then there's a long-term commitment. Like, hey, to make that money back, a boba shop's not going to be making $100,000 in profit in the first year generally. I mean, maybe it depends on I don't know, they're opening a Somi by me, and I'm pretty excited about that. But I'm pretty confident they'll make their money back. But there's this long-term commitment of they have to be profitable for a certain amount of years before they can make their money, the money back that they initially invested. And then it could be really difficult to reverse. And so normally the more you lock in your money, the more difficult it is to reverse it. So a good example is when I opened my recording studio up, I invested in a lot of equipment. Shortly after this technology came out called GarageBand for Apple, where you could record in your house a pretty solid quality track. And because of that, I couldn't reverse my investment decision. I had tens of thousands of dollars of equipment. I couldn't go and return it. There's a 30-day return policy. And then the value of that equipment went down drastically after the new technology came out. Same thing, you open up a boba shop, you sign a lease for a year or 3 years or 5 years. You can't reverse that without paying a substantial penalty. And that's that concept of sunk costs, right? You have sunk costs that we take on. So whenever we're looking at a business decision, we look at outflows and inflows. That's all it is. You can make money or spend it over the life of a capital expenditure. And using that information, we can determine if an investment is better than no investment, if we should make an investment, or if we can compare investment decisions. So generally, the fact patterns that we use in capital budgeting are what's the acquisition costs, the initial cash outflow, what's the use, how much does it cost to use, and how much money do we get when we dispose of an asset. So the first thing we can do is compute payback period and describe its use. So the main concepts we're going to talk about is how do we determine, right? The overall theme is how do we determine if a project is viable? First thing is payback period. There's these concepts of discounted cash flow concepts and not discounted cash flow concepts. So I want you to think of it this way: is if you're taking college classes, and if you're deciding to pursue a college education, you know it's going to take you at least 4 years to get a degree, and then maybe another year to get a job. It's not easy. This is a tough long-term decision. And then you're paying money and losing money throughout that process, right? Or you could take a job today for what close to minimum wage in the Bay Area at $20 an hour. So that's what, $40,000 to $50,000 a year. And so you're foregoing that $40,000 or $50,000 a year. If you're going to a state university without scholarship, that's another $20,000 a year. So you're in essence, you're losing out on about $70,000 a year for 4 years. So if you think about that, you're losing out on about $280,000 a year, 70,000, 70,000. I'll draw this up. I want to use that as a concept because I think it's going to be helpful for you to see. So chapter 10, or chapter 11, chapter 10, and have the concepts. Investment decision. So college, say 20,000 a year. That seem fair? 20,000 a year, maybe on the low end. 30,000 a year better. What's more realistic to all of you, you think? I want you to be involved in this. This is important for you to see.
Probably more like 30, 40,000.
Okay, let's call it 40,000 a year. College. The cost. You have rent and everything as well. And then you have lost income of another 40,000 a year, let's say. What's 20, say $20 an hour times 40 times, 20 times, there's 2,080 working hours in a year. So total yearly cost. So by year 4, right, this is the years. 1, 2, 3. Years aren't money, but I guess they are. I think it's time is money. 4. Number. Total cost. So you can see that by the end of year 4, we've already foregone about $326,000 in income. Wow, that's quite a bit, right? So the question is, how do we assess if this degree, right? We should be assessing, is this degree worth our foregoing the lost income and the payment for college? And so then we'd have to do that by our increased income, right? So we're not getting any increased income here. But now, I'm not doing inflation or anything, but now let's say we come out and we start at $70,000 a year. In addition, because you're now a professional, you're getting raises. So let's say you're getting a 5% raise every year. Here, you're probably getting cost of living wages, your lost income. So maybe this times 1.02. So difference. So eventually, we should be making up our total cost. The first question is, what is our payback period? So how long will it take us to make back the cost that we've foregone, right? That's all we're asking, is how many years will it take us to make up our college education? And so here, we would just, let me just add the years, +1. All we're doing is deciding how many years will it take us back. So we know we spent 331. The question is, when will this difference equal 331? We'll get there. Somewhere between the 12th and 13th year. This is summing it. See here. Oh, longer. Let's see. Sorry, this is just the truth. Let's see. Our payback period will happen. Oh wait, no. Payback period's here. Yeah, payback period's here, where we will have made between on the 15th on the 12th year, we will have made $281,000 more than if we had never gone to college. While on the 14th year, we would have made $332,000 more. So really, it's about 13 years. If you go to college, after 13 years, you will have made more. That's the payback period. It'll take you about 13 years to invest in the college and then make the money back. Under these circumstances, this is not the only, you might get your CPA too. There's other things that can boost you. I'd say, does this seem reasonable to me after, let's see, what, 5 years of college? Most of my friends are making about 100,000. So maybe this is closer to, I think it's closer to about a 10% raise every year. So with that, your payback period is probably a little shorter. What is it? 300. So closer to 10, 11 years, you will be making more. So the question then is, should you make the decision? And it's like, well, what's your payback? Like, when do you want to make your money back by? Well, it seems like this is if you're planning on working more than 11 years of your life, which most of you are, it's a clear decision you should go to college in the long term. It might be harder in the short term, but then suddenly in the long term, now, if you look at most people work for 30 years, right? We can just play this out a little bit. If you work for 30 years, ultimately, you are going to make about $6 million more than someone who didn't go to college. So clearly, you want to go to college in the long term, but it'll take you 11 years to get your payback. Does that make sense? That's the first option. So let's look at it from a business application. So the cost of the investment versus the cost of the investment divided by the annual net cash flow is one way to calculate the payback period. So the cost of the investment in this example, cost of investment, payback period. Cost of the investment is equal to cost of investment by annual net cash flow. So the cost of the investment here is 16,000. Your payback period is, or your annual net cash flow. So this equipment is going to give you $4,100 a year. It costs you $16,000. So it's going to take you 3.9 years to make your money back. If we did it using this math, like this is oversimplified. I give you the more complex version. If we say our initial cost, if we use the college example, our cost investment is 160,000. And then our annual net cash flow, we'll take the average of this here. Let's take what an average, over the first 10 years. let's say 120,000. Payback period is going to be 1.3 years after the investment. That's if we were able to make all that investment on day one. Mouse is out of battery. That's if all your investments made on day one. So this is oversimplified. I'm just showing you how you could apply it to your life as well. Or if we said 70,000 on the day one investment at 2.2 year payback period. What I showed you was this example. What if there's a payback period with uneven cash flows? We have to do what I just did as an example. Where we start with more years of negative outflow, we have to do this year 0, year 1, year 2, year 3, using this Excel formula I showed you. I'll use their example, right? We can do 0. Just so you all have the examples. So they're saying in the first year, they're spending 16,000, but then afterwards we get an incremental 3,000, 4,000, 4,000, 4,000, year 4, 5,000, and then it starts to go down. And so then what we do is they're just taking the sum. So we just sum when we try to find the period when we make everything back. So here, after about between 4 and 5 years, we make all the money back, right? And so then how do we calculate the 4.2 years? In the last year, we make an extra $1,000, right? There's 1,000 out of the 5,000. So we take that one. So we have 4 years here. And then we take the 1,000, which is this minus this, divided by the 5,000. You get 0.2. So payback period is here. Is the 4 plus the 0.2. So in theory, it'd only take you 1/5 of a year in order to get back your cash flow. Does that make sense? So hopefully looking at this, it's kind of encouraging, right? Like 10 years is a long time, but if you're using this, you can see like how this could be beneficial to you. And then you could look at different degrees. Maybe this is an accounting degree, but maybe you make more with a computer science degree, but it costs you more upfront, right? Or if you're starting a business, you can use this to analyze anything. When will this make your money back? And you can generally see using this kind of projections, like, wow, should you take a decision that could make you $5 million more in your lifetime? If there's this one decision and college is that decision, like, yeah, probably, right? That seems like a pretty good decision to me. And it should also be comforting that, oh, maybe it looks like not beneficial in the short term, but in the long term, it's highly beneficial. But does anyone see any problems with this model, like off the get-go?
It doesn't acknowledge other large expenses you might have, like buying a house or a car, or I guess in this case, renting a house.
Yeah, oh yeah. So of course, like if we're looking at overall budget, good identification, Christina. We're not looking at the other expenses that we might be foregoing, right? Like by paying for college, maybe you could have spent that $40,000 on another investment, right? Like you could have bought a house, maybe $160,000, maybe not in the Bay Area, but maybe you could put a down payment, or that stock you could have purchased, right? So how also this isn't taking into consideration inflation. Like we've talked about net present value before, and net present value is how we identify the dollar value today versus in 30 years, right? Because money is worth more today than it is in 30 years, not just because of inflation, but because you could be using it to make investments. So we have to standardize this for an opportunity cost, right? That's its main drawback of the payback period is we aren't using something called a discount rate. We aren't quantifying this or discounting it to determine what we could get in exchange, or what we get. It's what we could call the opportunity rate, the discount rate. So what we do to get around this is the concepts of like net present value, and we'll go over that next. Is we'll have to use a net present value concept to take into consideration, like maybe investing $160,000 for our own education is great in the short term, but or in the long term. But is that, what if I was to invest that $160,000 in a marketplace in the stocks that give me a 6% annual return? If that was to make me more, then maybe I should have done that, right? Does that make sense?